Support for Amplified Voices comes from the Restorative Action Foundation. Learn more at restorativeactionalliance.org.
Everyone has a voice, a story to tell. Some are marginalized and muted. What if there were a way to amplify those stories, to have conversations with real people in real communities, a way to help them step into the power of their lived experience? Welcome to Amplified Voices, a podcast lifting the experiences of people and families impacted by the criminal legal system. Together, we can create positive change for everyone.
Hello, and welcome to a special episode of Amplified Voices. I'm your host, Jason, here with my co-host, Amber. Good morning, Amber.
Good morning, Jason. Happy to be here.
Today, we're going to be talking with Ray Boyd. Hi, Ray.
How you doing?
And in addition to Ray, we're also going to hear later in the episode from someone who's been a recurring guest on Amplified Voices, and that is Barbara Fair. Hello, Barbara.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, Barbara. Hi, Ray.
Hi, Amber.
Hi, Amber.
All right, so today we're going to start with the same question that we always start with. Ray, could you tell us a little bit about your life before you entered the criminal legal system and what brought you into it?
Well, I'm one of 9 children born to my mother in the city of New Haven. As an adolescent, when I started to reach my preteen years, I thought that the things that we had wasn't enough for us. I grew up in the Hill section. There was drugs running rampant throughout my neighborhood.
What number were you? Like of the 9, where are you in that?
Oh, I was number 8.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What's the age difference between you and the oldest and you and the youngest?
Well, me and the youngest is 4 years and me and the oldest is 11 years. There's not much space in between me and my other siblings, But yeah, I thought that what my mother was providing for us at the time wasn't enough. So I chose to get involved in illicit activities in my neighborhood to try to bring in a little bit more money for myself so that I could buy some of the little things that I thought I needed at that time, maybe an extra pair of sneakers or, extra pair of pants or an outfit to go to school. And it just spiraled out of control. Our neighborhood was so saturated by it. Out of the 9 of us, 7 of us ultimately had contact with the law throughout my period of being free prior to my incarceration. So, it's just something that everybody found a way to get into to make money during this time. And for me, it started early on. I probably was about 12 or 13 that I can remember my first hand-to-hand transaction.
Those were your role models that were doing it, right? So it wasn't like you had any type of frame of reference. Hey, this is the way you're going to end up getting ahead a little bit. You just follow this path.
Yeah, the individuals that you see walking to school every morning, if you're going to school at 8 o'clock, they're out there 7:30 in the morning. And when you come home from school, these are the individuals that you see. They have the cars, they have the clothes, they have the jewelry. It can start off as a simple walk to the store to get them a sub. And they give you $20 and the sub and the soda only cost $5 and they're telling you to keep the change. You know what I'm saying? For a kid, that has a way of making a strong impression on an individual. We normally leave a $5 tip at a restaurant, but now you're getting a $15 tip for just running to the corner store. That's a big difference, especially from someone coming from a welfare home. The economics is messed up in the home. So, I saw it as a way out, but I found that it was a way in for me to get into a lot of trouble during that time. So ultimately, by age 17, I had taken the life of another young man from my community. And shortly thereafter, I was sentenced to 50 years as a juvenile lifer in the state of Connecticut.
17-year-olds, you were sentenced to 50 years.
Yeah, I was sentenced to 50 years.
You found yourself going from a 12-year-old kid that wanted to make a little money because what you saw as the people that had some level of success were driving around with the cars and the money, went from that to being further and further into that lifestyle. Did you find that there was a lot of violence in your neighborhood?
Oh, yeah. I mean, violence became like a social norm in my neighborhood. And that's why I think in this day and time, when we witness it on TV, I don't know how close you guys are to these neighborhoods, but when you witness the proliferation of violence in the neighborhood, it's a social norm. So to those outside of the neighborhood, they're shocked and awed at what's taking place in the neighborhood. But for our youth, this is like the average pickup basketball game for them.
Could you have imagined a different path for yourself?
I often think about that. You know, some people, if they're spiritual, they'll say that it's been written, that I had to travel this path to be able to do what I'm doing now. When I was incarcerated, I was a 7th grade dropout, and I was reading on a 3rd or 4th grade level. Since my incarceration, I acquired my GED. I took college courses. I'm a published author. I took real estate classes. There were so many opportunities for me when I became dissatisfied with the situation that I was put in and decided to do something better than just become the average criminal or the average inmate or the average convict within the Department of Correction. My journey wasn't one that was smooth the entire time that I was there. When I first came in to the Connecticut Department of Corrections, gang violence was at an all-time high. Pretty much association breeded similarity. So it was like there were cities and there were towns that had their own gangs. So New Haven had what was called the Elm City Boys. When I came to prison, I didn't know anybody from Bridgeport or from Hartford or from New London or Danbury. All I knew was guys from New Haven. So that association breeded similarity for me. So if they had problems and I was hanging with somebody from New Haven that was associated with a gang, their problems became my problem. And so that compounded the problems that I was already dealing with my incarceration.
Physically, you must have looked different going in at that young age also. Were you prepared?
You can never prepare yourself for prison because you don't know what's on the other side of the door waiting for you. However, during this time, we were dealing with the onset of mass incarceration. So a lot of my associates I knew from the streets were cycling through this system, you know, for drug charges and so on and so forth. And like I said, there was gangs there. So gangs pretty much provided a lot of protection for a lot of individuals that weren't snitches or, you know, just individuals that were cool that they knew from the neighborhood.
So you had to learn the culture to survive.
It's definitely a culture shock once you enter there. There's so many things that you can't do that you used to do in society. And there's no written rules. There's nobody telling you this. You have to just figure it out on your own.
How long in total were you incarcerated?
I did 10,810 days in the Connecticut Department of Correction, which is 29 and a half years to the day. And I was incarcerated in 1992.
Wow. So you grew up in prison.
Yes, I grew up in prison, unfortunately. And that's why I say some people would say that it was written for me to go through this, just to be able to be placed on a platform where I could speak for the voiceless, the individuals that I left behind. I can be that voice without retribution for them.
So you're recently released then.
Yeah, I was released on November 15th of last year.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
So you were an individual who was part of a community with systemic issues. How could society be better able and prepared to handle the next Ray Boyd who comes through the system so that his life doesn't have to follow the same trajectory that yours has?
Going to prison for some young men was a badge of honor in our neighborhoods. So you would come home and you would be seen as some type of hero that you made it through all of those different trials and tribulations that existed on that other side of the wall. One of the things as I begin to become consciously aware of my surroundings and how a lot of what I was going through was by design, meaning mass incarceration, and how our communities, the Black and brown communities, were being targeted for mass incarceration. I think that education is one of the key things that we can do to remove these systemic issues from our neighborhood. You would think that it was odd that I read my first book in its entirety in prison when it should have been in a school.
Absolutely.
A lot of people say that our schools are failing, and I don't think our schools are failing. I think our schools are functioning, especially schools in the Black and brown community, are functioning in the manner in which they were designed to function, which is to fail the Black and brown student to create the prison to school pipeline.
When we talk about the failures of the system, and historically it's been designed in such a way to keep the segment of the population down, you're clearly an educated person and you've had to go about getting educated the hard way. And if you had had opportunities, it would have been a totally different story for you.
Mm-hmm.
There are different experiences that people have and different perceptions that people who don't really have a proximity or familiarity with it, they think, okay, somebody goes to prison and they stay in this one prison for the entire time that they're incarcerated, and it's one cell and it's very familiar and all of that. Can you talk a little bit about, were you ever transferred between prisons? Did you experience any movement within the prison? Tell us a little bit about that.
I've been in pretty much every level 4 in the state of Connecticut.
For those who don't know what a level 4 is, could you explain that a little bit?
Pretty much if you're not a high risk level inmate or a gang member, your level begins at a 4, and then you'll have to do 35% of your time before you're eligible for a level reduction to a level 3, and then 30% more of your time to a level 2. And then level 5 are pretty much those that are in Supermax, which was Northern at this time, or some type of administrative segregation or chronic discipline.
And so you were considered a level 4. What kind of landed you in that?
My level 4 was stamped on me because of the length of time that I had for my sentence. My first housing was at Cheshire Correctional Facility. And then from Cheshire, I went to Gardner and then to Osborne, which is Summers then. And then back to Cheshire, where I spent probably about 12 years. I was sent to Virginia twice, then came back to Connecticut and just was shipped between Gardner, McDougall, and Cheshire up until my release as a mentor in a true program at Cheshire.
And so you did some traveling, but not in a way that you may have imagined to do some traveling.
I wasn't on a profile with anyone. So it's like when population management just wants to move you or they need space, they can just move you at will. It's important we understand that when someone is sentenced, they become the ward of the state. So once you become the ward of the state has jurisdiction over where they want to house you at, when they want to house you there.
What kind of impact did that have on any type of relationships you were trying to maintain with people who weren't incarcerated?
There's some of my brothers and sisters I hadn't seen till I was released from incarceration. Because one, the number of individuals that you can have on your visiting list, and two, the distance between the prison and where your location is at.
Tell us a little bit about that experience. What happens? They just come in one day and say, okay, you're going to be transferred. Do you have notice?
You'll get notice probably about 2:00 that you need to be in the AP room by the change of shift. You don't know where you're going till you get there. You have individuals such as myself that have a lot of time that acquire a lot of mementos and pictures and stuff like that. And once you're moved, you lose a lot of that stuff because you're only allowed to take 6 property boxes with you wherever you go. The rest of the stuff is sent home. So you have individuals that lose a lot of things that may never get out of prison. Some guys I know, they don't have anywhere to send their stuff because they don't have any family anymore because they've been in prison so long. So it's like, we'll hold it for 30 days. If nobody picks it up, we're throwing it in the trash.
So everything that was important to you had to fit in 6 boxes.
Yeah, your whole life had to fit in 6 boxes.
And the level of anxiety that you have to live with, I mean, just adding this on top of it, never knowing when that's going to happen.
Like I said, when I went in, gang violence was at its highest in the state of Connecticut during this time. I lived day by day. And then as I started to remove myself away from a lot of the activities that was going on within the facility, I used to wonder, will I make it through the time? Because you're pretty much like the calf that someone wants to get veal from. You're put in this little box and you can't move. You have all these preservatives that you have to eat on commissary to try to maintain a sufficient diet. So it's like, is this food going to kill me? Or, I can't work out the way I want to. I can't exercise the way I want to. And I have to eat junk for the next 30, 40 years.
So you brought up the idea of just being in this small space. And one of the things we want to get to today specifically is talking about solitary confinement. But before we even do that, I know you were in prison when the pandemic began.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like for you?
Well, when you come to prison, you talk about hypervigilance, and hypervigilance is predicated upon you thinking that someone's going to harm you. So you're always vigilant to looking at someone, looking at hand movements, looking at sudden movements by other inmates. But when you're being attacked by this foreign virus that you can't see it coming, you don't know which direction it's coming with. And then you're locked in your cell because they don't want any movement in the facilities. So your hypervigilance is compounded. Like you think you're going to die, but you don't know when you're going to die because you don't know when this foreign virus is going to attack or invade your cell or your cellmate.
That sounds terrifying.
It's definitely terrifying. And I lived through it. I actually contracted the virus while I was there. I spent 8 days in the hospital.
So to us, other than occasionally getting a story here or there, you were a number, right?
Yeah.
So I want to take a moment as we're hearing this story that every single one of those numbers was a real person. What was it like? Were you able to come forward and say, hey, I've got symptoms, or was it so bad that you needed to? I mean, what's going on in your mind? Walk us through exactly what happened.
I was tested the Monday before Thanksgiving of 2020, and I had a rapid test and a regular test. Both tests came back negative.
Okay.
The night of Thanksgiving, I started feeling sick.
Oh, wow.
So the next morning I woke up and I told the officer that I needed to be tested. So I got a rapid test, and the rapid test came back positive. They didn't let me go back to the unit. They had a whole bunch of officers pack my stuff. Again, we go back to losing items. I mean, I had water in my cup. Next thing I know, I had water all over my legal work or letters from my loved ones. You know, if I had an open bag of potato chips, the potato chips were just thrown in with my property, crushed up. So now you have to sort through all of these things. And I think if we go back to when the ACLU made an agreement with the state, a lot of times these inmates were losing a lot of their property. That's why they didn't want to come forth, those that were sick, and were trying to just go through it on their own because the officers and the staff were just discarding property without caring.
So you were physically moved to another place. But at that point in November of 2020, there were a number of people that were testing positive. So where were you put?
It was the old segregation at Cheshire. It eventually was shut down by the medical staff because it wasn't fit to house COVID patients. And then I was sent to UConn Hospital like 2 nights after that. I spent 8 days in UConn. I was on like 6 liters of oxygen and all the other drugs that they were giving me at that time to rid my body of COVID.
How do they treat you as somebody coming from a prison at UConn? Are you handcuffed to the bed? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, you're shackled to the bed. One of your legs is shackled, and you have a correction officer outside of your room. But the correction officer wouldn't come in your room because you had COVID.
So not only are you dealing with this debilitating, horrible illness that's scary, that you don't know what the course of the illness is going to be, you're doing it shackled to the bed. I'm so sorry that you went through that, Ray.
I mean, the conscious thing about the whole situation is that I don't have enough oxygen to walk 5 paces.
Right.
Right. But make sure that you're shackled to the bed.
But I'm shackled to the bed and I'm proning to sleep so that my lungs can get some type of oxygen. And they think that I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk out the hospital. I'm not going anywhere. I can't breathe.
So, Ray, during that time, there was a lot that was going on just out in society with COVID-19 and people being able to see loved ones when they were experiencing COVID-19 and isolation and all of those things. While you were there at the hospital, were there attempts to have you connected to family by the staff digitally or anything like that?
No, I couldn't because I was not on what they call Ward 5, which is the contracted floor that the department has with UConn Hospital. I was on another floor in another ward, and I could not use the phone. So I had no access to anybody. My lawyer had to contact the facility and tell him that he needed a legal call because I had legal cases filed with the court in order to make a third party call to my family so that they would hear me and know that I was okay.
So If you had a direct line to the legislators and the governor who could make a difference for what you went through for the next people, if you had them sitting right in front of you, what would you say to them today that you would like to see them enact?
I would like to see them change the medical furlough policy for releasing guys that are sick or that have existing ailments that, if they contract COVID-19, could be detrimental. So I would like to see them make changes to the medical furloughs or medical parole bill so that individuals will have that opportunity, because there's so many individuals that could have benefited from it. And I'm sure a couple of those guys had succumbed to COVID-19.
And had you not pulled through, you would have been there at the hospital alone with no contact with family, and that would have been the end.
That's another factor that plays on your mind while you're there. I'm saying to myself, this thing is going to kill me, and it's going to kill me with nobody around me.
Right.
I'm glad you pulled through. We're fortunate that you're here with us and here to tell your story and maybe raise awareness so that we can help make changes. If we could transition a little away from COVID, go back to talking about your experiences with solitary confinement while you were incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to share with us about that?
Well, there's two parts to this solitary confinement thing for me. I'll start with one being Northern. A lot of individuals that I've seen go through Northern during this time, I've seen them succumb mentally. I've mentioned this before with Ms. Fair, that we always talk about the physical violence that goes on in prison, but we never talk about the psychological and emotional violence that individuals are faced with, and how psychological warfare doesn't involve any weapons. So it's hard to really see the scars that you're putting on someone when you abuse them in an environment like that. And we talk about coming to prison and learning a culture. You have staff members that perpetuate a culture in that environment because they can get away with it. So you have staff members that are treating inmates that may be suffering mentally in that environment because they feel as though, okay, this is the level 6 or level 5. This is the worst of the worst. And they have the backing of their superiors to do whatever they want to do in that environment. So it's a good old boys club where they're covering each other's back when they go in there and they may 4-point restraint somebody or punch somebody or spray mace in somebody's cells. All of these things have an effect on a person. But to them, it's a part of the culture that they're perpetuating. So after they beat somebody up, it's okay to go to the OM, wash the mace off of you, and joke about how you had someone's arm twisted so bad behind their back that you almost broke it, or you had your knee on someone's chest so hard that you just kept pounding on them while you were laying there.
Did you find that maybe there were corrections officers or other staff inside of this violent environment that felt uncomfortable with what was going on? Or you saw, people saying, wait a minute, what is happening here?
Yeah, you always will get the individual that's dissatisfied with what's going on, but that individual always stands out. At the end of the day, when you're talking about a person that has to use this as means to feed his family, it's like a bad cop turning on the whole police force.
Right.
Then a lot of those cops suffer as well. So they may not partake in what's going on, but they'll keep their mouth closed just so that they can get by and continue to feed their family and pay their bills.
It sounds to me like you have a lot of empathy for other people and that the trauma that you felt was more seeing other people suffer than you going through it yourself.
Yes. By the time I had got there, I had became an avid reader. So I had a lot of books and a dictionary. And actually, the individual that was my cellmate at the time was someone I had knew for a while. So when we got there, we knew the environment that we were going into. Like there's a lot of hooting and hollering on the doors and banging on the doors because this environment has been created to act like that. From what they've done to the inmates, this is how the inmates act there. So I had made an agreement with the individual that was my cellie at the time. We were reading, and words that we didn't know, we would write definitions on a piece of paper on the door. And if you went to the door, you had to read all the words and all their definitions. So this would keep us off the door and having little social interaction with the staff other than when they came by to give us the trays or whatever. One day, an officer came to our door and opened our door and was like, "What's all of this?" And we had 4 line pages of words and definitions. And we were telling them that. And he went and got a captain. And the captain came and he was like, "Well, what's this?" And we told him. And he was like, "You guys don't belong here." And when he told me that we didn't belong there, a red light went off in my head. And I was like, because we're not acting the way everybody else is acting, which will perpetuate the continuation of having these individuals stay in this environment, they got to get us out of here. And sure enough, the next day, that same captain came to us and said, "We're putting you in the program. You guys don't belong here." He said it again.
So you don't belong here, but other humans belonged in that environment, is what they were saying.
Because we weren't acting according to how
they wanted to see to keep the environment in place.
Exactly. It's a numbers game. This is why you've seen over the years, Northern was not designed to house chronic discipline inmates. They weren't designed to house SRG inmates. They were designed to house the worst of the worst in the state of Connecticut. However, they cannot keep the numbers up in that facility to keep it functioning. So they'll say, okay, let's ship a gang unit over there. Let's ship a chronic discipline unit over there. And this is what raises the numbers over there and what allowed them to keep the abuse and the torture going on in that building.
Wow. I just have to take a minute to take that in, because the idea that any human would be in that environment, it becomes about systems that need to continue to function because so much money, time, resource, jobs, all of it kind of goes into that to keep this perception of that we have these worst of the worst.
Yeah.
And when you put someone in a cage and strip them of their humanity, how are they going to act?
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that Jason said because it really struck me and, you responded to. In terms of the idea of having empathy when you're seeing other people suffering, I think when I talked to my loved one who's experienced solitary confinement, that was one of the things that was most difficult for him. So, for instance, he had an individual when he was incarcerated that had open heart surgery, was sent to the hospital, had open heart surgery, came back, no period of recovery, just came back into the cell, and they're just treating him like it's another day, and he's trying to recover from open heart surgery that he had like yesterday. And the suffering and the lack of care that this individual experienced while trying to recover from that really weighed on the heart of my loved one. And I can only imagine that that is not a unique story.
No, it's not. Even using today's numbers of those that are incarcerated, which is just above 9,000 and some change. I spoke about the medical ward that's at UConn. You only have about 15 beds in there. So you can't keep individuals at the hospital that need to recover when you have other individuals that need those beds that have to come in with procedures. So what do? You have to send them back to the facility that they were at and treat them like a regular inmate and hope that they make it through. That's just the reality of it. Here you have a medical field that you knew was so wrong that you canceled a $100 million contract with them, but you'll still allow them to perform procedures on the inmates that you're responsible for. Why take away a $100 million contract and still allow your inmates that you're responsible for to go there for a heart surgery or a knee surgery? And if you look at John Dempsey Hospital, I went there in 2012 and researched it. I believe during that time, it was the 6th worst hospital in the country to practice medicine.
Wow.
So any other thoughts on solitary before we turn it over to Barbara?
Yeah, don't get caught up in the names that the Department of Corrections says constitutes one being in solitary confinement. General population today is solitary confinement within the Connecticut Department of Corrections. There's no other way of getting around it.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that in solitary confinement under administrative seg or chronic discipline, even in segregation, you're entitled to an hour a day out of your cell. And prior to the governor making his little tweak to the bill, quote unquote giving individuals extra time. In Cheshire, you're only out an hour in the morning and an hour at night. However, if you work during first shift, you're only getting an hour a day because that's the hour that's allotted to you at night. So we're still experiencing solitary confinement within the Department of Corrections. And I won't sway from that until there's more time given to the inmate population for them to properly exercise. Look at our medical bills. Look at how many individuals are suffering from diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. And that's all because you're keeping them in a confined space.
And what do you think is causing that? We hear a lot of different rationalizations as to why that's happening. What is your thought on that?
Prior to the governor making his mandate, it was just what it was. But once the governor made his mandate, you had a lot of unions come together and staffing. The shorting of staffing issues wasn't really an issue of COVID-19 and staff getting COVID-19. It was staff taking their PL days, their IL days, and they were taking them in alignment with each other so that the facility itself would be short-staffed. And if the facility itself is short-staffed, you would have to lock down the facility, which puts it in an even worse solitary condition. Because now you have inmates that are locked down, that are used to getting 2 hours a day. Now they're only getting a shower or a phone call that day.
So what you're saying is there was a situation where it was retaliation against the changes that were being proposed or trying to be made just to treat people like humans.
That still goes on today. I get calls every day from prison. Just last night, they just came out of phase 2. They're in phase 1 with COVID, but they're still going into lockdown statuses because the staff are still doing what they're doing. The weekends, they're locked down because all the staff are taking off for the weekend.
So, Barbara, you've been listening to Ray and our conversation. What thoughts do you have?
My thought is I wish I hadn't listened to Ray because it's hard to focus. I'm just a mess right now emotionally. As he talked, all I thought about was my son, who went into Northern at 17 and used to write me these horror stories about what they were doing to him. And because he was such a bad way mentally, I just thought maybe it really wasn't happening. And to think that this was happening to my child, I'm just overcome. And especially when I leave here, I'm going to the hospital to see my son, who they broke in Northern 20 years ago. And it's been 20 years of going to hospitals, being on psych meds. I feel I lost my son in Northern. The state doesn't have to pay for anything they did to him. Our family had to suffer. And so to hear Ray talking about it and realizing a lot of this stuff my son was telling me that I couldn't believe was happening was really happening. And so it's hard. I don't think I can take enough deep breaths right now to talk about solitary. I really can't.
I really want to acknowledge the pain that you're feeling. Also, when I was listening to Ray, when I thought about the idea that the system would continue to perpetuate and say to someone, well, this person doesn't belong here, and this other person who is a human, and this person deserves this. It is not okay, and it is something that we absolutely have to end. I can kind of echo what you were saying in terms of you're thinking about your loved one who may have experienced that, because to be the one that they said, it's okay for this to happen to him, you can't imagine it as someone who loves someone. You can't imagine that this is something that our state is continuing. And then the idea that that would be expanded out to almost everyone in the Department of Corrections, because lockdowns are happening in order to make things easier for corrections officers, which again, I'm not here to say that every correction officer is a bad person. There are shining lights in dark places. But when you've created a system where the violence is the norm, that will engulf everybody within that system. And I'm so sorry, Barbara, that you're continuing to go through this and your family is continuing to go through this. And that's why it's so important, as hard as it is, to have these conversations about what happens when we try to make change, why it's so important that the PROTECT Act is reconsidered. And when I'm thinking about all of this, like, what can we do? How can we fix this? The word that comes to my mind, loud and clear, is oversight. Where is the oversight?
It's definitely the most important part because, like Ray said, when you're behind those walls and no one's looking inside, and you have these guards who just sadistic and racist and can do all of these things to your loved ones, and you're not there to protect them. And that's what I think about so much is I couldn't protect my son at 17 years old from what they did to him. And even now, when I meet with DOC every week, trying to get us to come to some common ground with the PROTECT Act, like I question, why do they still chain and shackle people? We're not in slavery. We're not the 1600s. Why can't you use therapeutic restraints when someone's out of control? And then look at how they got out of control. You're creating mass mental illness. You have Gardner full of people that you've totally broken and destroyed and damaged. And yet DOC will not take responsibility for anything. They tell me these are necessary tools. And I sit there and I say, where do these mindsets come from where they think that it's necessary to chain and shackle people like that? It's just beyond me. And then for the commissioner to say we don't have solitary confinement, maybe he doesn't understand solitary confinement by Mandela rules is 22 hours in a cell without program and socialization. That's exactly what they do in so many prisons. How can you stand there and speak those words like you really think solitary confinement is not happening in Connecticut? It's just beyond me. But, you know, another thing I think about, and I actually posted on my Facebook page the other day when I was thinking about DOC, I said, Black History Month reminds me of the days when Black people were being lynched and castrated and burned alive. And they brought the children to those picnics. And those children smiled and watched that stuff going on. And some of those children are still among us because it was in my lifetime. So some of them are still alive. They may be the guards that now go inside and do that to people because they grew up with their parents thinking these are not even really human beings. So I can see how this stuff continues, but I just don't know what it's going to take for things to change when obviously people lack humanity.
So what I know about the PROTECT Act is that it was raised out of the Judiciary Committee. I think you told us that.
Yes, it was raised, and we'll be having a public hearing around mid-March. So we're looking forward to that. I think what's important for people that don't know what the PROTECT Act is, because you listen to the guards, they're saying, oh, they want to turn prisons into summer camps. We ask for 6 things. We have to have oversight and accountability. It's number one. The executive order just emphasized more that we have to have accountability because they're telling us they're letting people out 4 hours a day. And Ray is getting calls from people. I'm getting letters from people saying, no, they're not. And so without accountability, they can tell the governor anything that they're in compliance. Number 2, stop the extreme isolation and promote effective alternatives. Isolation just brings on so much mental illness, diseases, all of these things. These people come out of prison damaged in so many ways. They need to stop it. Connecticut's not a forerunner, even though they tell themselves they are. Many states have already enacted laws to restrict this. We need to stop. Then we're saying end the dehumanizing strip searches. Whenever we talk to somebody about being strip searched, the experience, they cry through it. They say it's the most humiliating, dehumanizing thing that they've ever had to go through. And these guards get to do it at whim. That needs to be regulated. We need to end the chains and the shackles. If you need to restrain somebody, use leather straps that they use in hospitals. You don't have to chain and shackle people. Keep families together as much as you can. talk about officer wellness because like Ray said, there are people in there who are being traumatized themselves from being in those environments and watching this abuse and knowing that they can't say anything. So we want to make sure they're well. And then finally, transparency. I mean, like January, 5 people died of COVID, 5 in 1 month. Where's the public outcry? November, we find out that a kid hung himself. And then just yesterday, I read where this kid, 19 years old, was in prison 1 month and dead. His cellmate was crying out for help because he couldn't breathe. And the video showed the guards taking their time, nonchalant, walking to his cell. And by the time they got there, he had expired. And they don't publicize all this stuff. People are getting sick and they're dying in these places. And our administration is acting like nothing's happening. So the public needs to know everything that's going on inside. That's all we're asking. We're not saying let everybody out their cells. Don't do it in a safe way. We know if you've been caging people all these years, there's going to be some rage and all kind of stuff coming out of these people once they get a little bit of freedom. So yeah, we have to safely do it. And we also have to have some program and something for them to do when they come out. Just don't open the cells and then everybody's going crazy. And you said, see, this is why we had to lock them down.
You organized a protest at the Capitol 2 weeks ago now, and you had some great speakers and people sharing their stories about their loved ones or about themselves and their experiences.
We need a governor that respects our voices, values our voices. Yep. And so the governor needs to recognize that, or he may not be that comfortable that he's going to win this election again.
I'm here today to stand behind and with all these folks to say it's time to end solitary confinement now and torture now.
And it is human torture. Let's talk about that. But they're coming home damaged. We got people that won't rebound from what's been done to them inside these walls.
I've never been the same since. I really don't like to be in dark places. My emotional well-being has never been the same.
As part of the larger dehumanization and lack of care of people, Black and brown people and poor people in this state.
The DOJ concluded its investigation regarding the use of solitary confinement for children in the adult prison system, the majority of whom are Black and being held pretrial, violate the 8th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution.
Solitary confinement, or the hold, is an outdated vestige of racist criminal justice system that sought to deny the humanity of Black people. We think the governor got power, but the power is in the people. Right. Great movements start with people.
Right. And I have another picture in my phone that shows my son in black box restraints in the solitary cell when they shut the door on him after he hadn't moved for 6 minutes or spoken for 6 minutes. And 90 minutes later was found dead. These people are in their care. There's never a reason to torture human beings.
And that even when children are calm and compliant, that they are handcuffed, strip searched, and locked in isolation cells as punishment. The need to transform the justice system for our children and our community is urgent and a public safety and moral and now legal necessity.
We must not let Governor Lamont try to put this down again.
And what we're looking for is justice, human justice.
Not reform, disrupt, dismantle. That should be our language.
People!
Not prisoners.
People!
Not prisoners.
People!
Not prisoners. And rebuild something that has humanity at the roots. And this system doesn't have that. And that's why for DOC to think it's necessary, absolutely necessary, to not do away with chaining people, shackling people inside of a cell. Because for them, that's okay. Because the lack of humanity in this system is prevailing.
And then we watched the news that night, and the major news stations covered the Unmask Our Kids rally that was happening a few feet away with not one mention of this protest and what was going on literally feet away. Like you had to walk through this protest to see the other protest.
Yeah, yeah. It's all intentional, though. They don't want people to know that there are people fighting back against all this stuff that's going on. They want people to feel hopeless.
So that part's incredibly frustrating. The promising thing is that you did get the law through the House and the Senate in the last session.
Yes. Bipartisan support, too.
So the trick is it's got to be done again, unfortunately. And then this time the governor has to sign it with increased pressure. So,
and we hope this time the governor will feel the pressure because he has literally ignored the prison population for 4 years. He's going to need Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven. I think it's best that he stop ignoring us.
You make a very, very important point there when we talk about the politics of getting things passed and public pressure and so on and so forth, because there are very few people that in their heart of hearts believe that humans should be tortured. And so it then becomes about framing. It becomes about standing up for what is morally right, regardless of where you live, whether you live in Bridgeport, whether you live in Fairfield, whether you live in Stamford, Greenwich, Hamden, wherever you're from. I think we can all get behind the idea that every person deserves the opportunity to not be tortured in the United States of America.
Yeah.
And so when we think about the idea that a politician would support the lack of transparency in any government entity or the torture of human beings, says a little bit more about them. And we as the public need to say, this is not okay with us. And we need to let our legislators know that this is what the PROTECT Act represents, the humanity of people behind bars.
Yes.
So in terms of supporting this particular initiative and bill, what are you asking people to do in this moment right now?
Mainly get to the governor's office, getting Lamont to at least pretend he cares enough to listen to the voices of all the legislators and the people across this state who said, we do not want torture in our state, in our name, and we want the PROTECT Act passed because it keeps not only the staff safe, it keeps prisoners safe, and it keeps communities safe who these people have to go back home to after they've been damaged.
So let's bring it back around to Ray and talk a little bit about your reentry.
Before we get to reentry, I want to talk to Ray a little bit about his journey to release. So, you're sentenced to 50 years, and obviously 50 years did not transpire. Tell us a little bit about the journey to make that happen.
It wasn't an easy one. Of course, I was sentenced to 50 years. And because I was a juvenile lifer in 2012, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Miller versus Alabama that it's illegal to sentence juveniles as adults for crimes that they committed under the age of 18. So in 2015, the state passed a law that said that after serving 60% of your time, you would be eligible for parole. However, I had a legal issue with that too, because I had acquired 14 years of good time during my course of incarceration that the state would not allow me to use towards my parole. And one of the main factors in Miller versus Alabama is that if you've shown that you have rehabilitated yourself to any degree in prison and you earn this good time, it should be allowed to use. So at the time I went to parole at, say, about 80-something% of my time. I was 21% above the actual 60% time. And I actually still have that case in the Connecticut Supreme Court because it will still help others who have rehabilitated themselves seek an early release on parole. So I try to get released on bail because I have several medical issues that actually COVID could have killed me because of the immunomedical issues that I have. And that did not work. I filed for 2 release on bails pending the outcome of my Connecticut Supreme Court case with regards to my good time for release. Those 2 unfortunately got shut down. Then I tried a modification a year prior to during COVID. That got shut down, and I waited another year after I had COVID and filed another modification that was ultimately granted to me, which made me immediately eligible for parole. However, the parole board did not want to give me an immediate hearing. They made me wait 4 months for a hearing. I was actually granted the modification in July, and I had to wait till November for a hearing when the judge ordered an immediate parole hearing for me to be released on parole. So it wasn't a walk in the park. Even when I made parole, they were trying to make me wait a whole nother month to get released. But we made some calls and, they told me that I would be released that following week. So I was released on Monday, November 15th. And I went to work as a broker's assistant at a real estate firm on November 22nd, that following Monday.
Was that last week like the longest week you were in prison?
It was actually the weekend. And it's like, you don't really want to believe it until you're actually told to go take your ID picture and, you'll be leaving and call your family, tell them they can pick you up on this day.
And your feet are actually outside. You're like, okay, now this is real.
And then it doesn't really hit you until the gate you always used to see the bus drive you in through, you're able to walk out of. I actually have some footage of me walking out of that gate and actually breaking down because I'm so used to being in the back of a van, shackled and chained, going in the opposite direction. So just walking out of there was like a miracle for me.
And the world's changed a little bit in 30 years now.
Oh, yeah. So much has changed. Like just being back in New Haven, I just see so many high rises now that I didn't see when I was younger and a teenager.
So when you think about re-entering the world and things that you are now learning that maybe didn't exist 30 years ago, what are like the main things?
Actually, I'm learning to pay my credit card bills online from my phone, from my main account, which is odd to me. I never thought that the world would actually literally be in the palm of your hand. If you need anything, you just pick up your phone and just ask Siri, or you're Googling. And, I spent a lot of time doing that and trying to get familiar with how the phone works. And it's just so much in the palm of your hand. Another thing is nobody knows anybody's number anymore. Like in prison, you have to know everybody's number because the phone system hasn't changed. Now, if you ask somebody, do you know their number? It's like some people don't even know their own numbers.
I know my number, but I don't know anybody else's number.
Yeah.
So you're going to work in real estate. That's part of your journey. And you've also written a book.
Yeah, I'm going to work in real estate. I actually have 7 more classes left. I wrote a book actually in 2.5 months during COVID because I didn't know, as I would say, that we had a foreign virus that was invading our space. I didn't know what life would look like for me. And I wanted those that knew me and those that didn't know me to see how my life had changed. We have this idea that a person just goes there and do their time and they come home. I wanted the individuals to see my ups and downs, what bumps I had in the road along the way, and how I ultimately became what some would consider in prison the model inmate.
So you were kind of facing that you might not make it out of here. And you were like, I want people to know the real story of the real Ray Boyd.
Most definitely. And I think the important thing for me was to leave something tangible, not just stories that can get translated in different versions throughout life. It was my own words. At the end of every chapter in my book, there's a place where I say my thoughts. And it's just my thoughts on how there's a preventative measure to every mistake that I made in my life. And I wanted to leave that for someone who isn't on the inside to be able to look and say, okay, he did this on the street or while he was in. I don't have to do that because it's a waste of time, because I wasted so many of my formative years in the beginning because of the culture of prison.
Right.
And I didn't know in the beginning that I didn't have to accept and be a part of that culture. So I'm trying to get individuals to know early on that, you don't have to be a part of that culture. And it's okay to be on your own while you're in prison doing the right thing as opposed to doing the wrong thing. Because we think when we're in prison, we're there for the mistakes that we made that only took us a second or a couple of seconds to make that changed our lives. But we don't have to be the title that people put on us.
So how does somebody get a hold of your book?
It's available on Amazon. It's called The Model Inmate, Mind Over Matter, How I Became the Model Inmate by Ray Boyd. Also, you can contact me at rasanallah20@gmail.com, and you can order it. I'll mail it to you through my publishing company. I also started a publishing company called Sun Publishing, CT. The Sun is an acronym for Saving Urban Communities. So I'm just trying to put out a lot of content that is preventative, because there's really nothing preventative in our neighborhoods now. We're in the day of reimagining prison, and I don't see how you can reimagine bondage. So I think more so we need to focus on preventative measures, how to stop individuals from even getting in those situations where they have to go to prison, where we have to reimagine anything.
I'm really excited about what you're doing. And I have a lot of conversation with people that say things like, oh, well, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Why should we be letting people out early? Why should we do compassionate release? Why should we do sentence modifications? Who better to stop cycles of violence in our community than individuals who have experienced the system and know that there's a better way?
Yes.
So I just want to thank you for everything you're doing, and I'm really excited about it. We're going to put your book in the podcast notes and get it out there as much as we can, because to have gone through what you've gone through, taking accountability, and I love that you said, you know, these are things that take moments to happen in context.
Mm-hmm.
Violence happens in context. Violence happens in places of scarcity and oppression and all of those things. And so when we don't deal with any of that on the preventative side, and then we go, you know what, we'll just incarcerate and dehumanize our way out of this, it's not going to work. But what we need is individuals like yourself that know.
Yeah, I just started a consultant services to be able to speak about preventative measures, to try to get into schools, talk with at-risk youth. Being able to prevent things from happening is the key. And my lived experience, I think, qualifies me enough. That's my PhD.
Yes.
My 30 years of incarceration allows me to teach individuals how to stay on the right path and not get on the wrong one.
Ray, thank you. It's been a pleasure meeting you and talking with you. So much respect for all that you've accomplished in your life. Kudos to you for all the wonderful things you're going to continue to do. Thank you, Barbara, for joining us this morning, connecting us with Ray, for being the brains behind pulling it all together, making sure that this initiative for Stop Solitary and the PROTECT Act remains in the forefront of everybody's minds and conversations as we go forward and hope to pass something to make the world a little more humane. And Amber,
thanks, guys, for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Until next time.
You've been listening to Amplified Voices, a podcast lifting the experiences of people and families impacted by the criminal legal system. For more information, episodes, and podcast notes, visit amplifiedvoices.show.